And thank you, Pete, for the introduction, and Pam for supporting this. This has been an amazing conference so far, and I'm honored to be here. And I look forward to just learning so much. And I'll just say before going on with my prepared remarks is that you'll see I have a very particular take. I'm a professor at a university. I'm working in the area of hip hop. And so what I'm hoping is that what I will say will broadly apply to things outside of higher education in the US. But I also would be interested to hear if you think it doesn't. So feel free to challenge. Okay. So enter the phrase "music saved my life" into a search engine and see what happens. When I did it, 0.68 seconds later, 560,000 hits appeared. The phrase comes up in confessional blog posts about the power of music and articles on mental health. It's the title of dozens of songs, a Mary J. Blige world tour, self-help books and memoirs. It adorns hoodies, t-shirts, and coffee mugs, and a variety of other merchandise. Taking the experiment a step further, I narrowed the search. House music saved my life, 107,000 hits. Hip hop saved my life, only 43,000 hits. I don't know, it should be more. And then on a whim, I checked a few other phrases. Calculus saved my life. Guess how many? There were 6, I don't know. Organic chemistry saved my life, 0. World history changed my life, also 0. Music, calculus, organic chemistry, and world history are all subjects taught to teenagers and young adults around the world. Among these, music is taught far less often than the others. And yet music in general, and especially popular genres such as hip hop, house, techno, and grime, are embraced as a life-saving force by young people around the world. Fortunately, popular music is being taken more seriously by educators and administrators, and even genres whose presence would once have been unwelcome in schools, if not forbidden, have now found a place in institutionally sanctioned activities and spaces. Popular music programs, ensembles, and curricula are appearing more frequently, and practitioners, including DJs, rappers, and producers who we've been hearing from, have been hired as full-time faculty. So I see this conference as part of a movement that argues that effective pedagogies can be built around the cultural values and imperatives of musics and their communities that have traditionally been excluded from or marginalized in educational institutions. So in this talk, I'd like to amplify this work with a broad appeal, that it is vital for any scholarship, pedagogy, or advocacy related to these genres to center the artists and communities who create these musics. So before continuing, I should contextualize this appeal by making clear who I am and who I'm not. I'm a scholar, an educator, and advocate who has taught a variety of popular music genres, such as hip hop, and particularly hip hop, at the university level since 1999. I'm also a musician, and I've spent time learning the art of the hip hop DJ, and have spent countless hours engaging with and observing hip hop artists. I am not, however, primarily a practitioner of the genres I study and teach. I'm also a privileged white man with tenure and research funds, which explains as much of my success in promoting hip hop in academia as my research, teaching, and advocacy. But even with this power and privilege that I have, my success has only come because I've been able to work in partnership with exceptional practitioners outside of the academy, and most of them people of color. So with this in mind, I offer 3 exhortations that draw both on my own experience and perspective, and importantly, on the perspectives and experiences of the remarkable artists with whom I've collaborated over the years. So my first exhortation is open the gates. And if you could move to the next slide. That's all, you can see that. Okay, actually go to the next slide. So Cotton Candy is a pioneering DJ, a legendary name in the world of turntablism, who has been active in the community for decades. She is also an educator, a mentor, a writer, and activist. She is, in short, as qualified as anyone to teach the art, culture, and history of the hip hop DJ and hip hop in general. However, like many practitioners with similar qualifications, she has found herself subject to academic gatekeeping. She was once asked by a faculty member at a local university to recommend someone to teach a hip hop course. They were dealing with an awkward situation. A faculty member, who was an academic and non-practitioner, had taught the course in the past, but the students complained that it felt disconnected to the genre they knew and loved. The professor said, "We need someone to teach this class," and then asked, "Do you know anyone who could teach it who at least has a master's degree?" Candy recalls, "I took a little bit of offense to it because you're asking me for a resource, knowing that I could teach this class myself, but I don't have a BA or Bachelor of Arts degree." So this is just one example of the academic gatekeeping that she has experienced. She has also observed exclusionary practices in the organization of conferences, panel discussions, and other public events where hip hop is centered, but the most authentic voices of hip hop are left out. I've heard similar stories from other artists. What is insidious about this gatekeeping is that the artists are often simultaneously exploited and excluded. They are consulted for their expertise, almost always without compensation, and then shut out from the initiatives they assist. This gatekeeping also hurts students. This is a point well made by David Spellman, a North Carolina-based author and educator of Just Like Music, social emotional learning inspired by hip hop. So he says, hip hop can add immense value from an academic perspective. The whole notion of inviting the culture of hip hop of the students into the classroom is a form of culturally responsive instruction. But the challenge is maintaining the rigor, which can be done as with a gifted educator. However, when we shut the educators from the culture out of the classroom, and as in the situation Cotton Candy described, assign less qualified instructors, he says, quote, "There will be an inauthentic feel if the educator does not fully understand the importance of hip hop to the students, and it will create a disconnect between students and educators." And those were his words. This is not to say that only hip hop artists can teach hip hop, but we risk alienating students if our pedagogy does not resonate with their lived experience and the lived experience of the music that they love so much. So those of us on the inside, and I am addressing myself to those of us who are gatekeepers or potentially gatekeepers, those of us on the inside, whether in educational institutions, industry, or the nonprofit sector, must open the gates to practitioners. And obviously our ultimate goal should be to remove any barriers altogether, but opening the gates is a good first step. So this could take many forms. We should invite them to perform, to lead workshops, to teach courses. We should make space and facilities available to them. We should consult with them for their expertise and compensate them for their time. And as Junius Brickhouse, a dancer and educator and executive director of the nonprofit Urban Artistry, told me, we should always aim to develop ongoing sustainable relationships. And here's a quote from Junius. "Give me a chance to show you what I've studied my whole life," he asks when he is invited into academic spaces. But he can't do that if he's treated as a spectacle, as he has described how he's been treated. Brought in to add some color or to a public event or to demonstrate diversity in a superficial, tokenistic way, only to be ignored after that. Now, I'll pause for a second to mention a little bit about Junius, because Pete was mentioning my work, my international work, and with a program called Next Level, which is a US State Department supported program that is essentially hip hop diplomacy. We send US hip hop artists to various communities around the world to come together and build relationships around hip hop. And one of the things that I'm talking about, I've tried to do myself. I'm always working on this, but I was the founding director of Next Level. But after it was established for a couple of years, I brought Junius on as an associate director, then co-director, and now he is director, and I've stepped out of the way. So that's kind of an example of what I'm trying to both preach and practice, which is open the gates and then provide continual support, but also get out of the way, because sometimes getting out of the way is the best thing you could do for others. So the benefits of moving from a practice of gatekeeping to gate opening are immense. So I'll offer an example of my own. Another example. A few years ago, I was invited to give a talk at the University of Michigan. And I asked if, as part of my visit, I could bring some artists who I knew who worked in nearby Detroit. One of the students, Deidre Smith, an MC who works as De-Essence, made such a good impression that a faculty member, Mark Katz, successfully lobbied to have her hired to teach a rap songwriting course. Pete, can you go to the next slide? So, and in fact, she was hired to teach a course the next semester at the University of Michigan. And at the end of the semester, and this was her first time teaching at a university, De-Essence wrote in a Facebook post that she was, quote, crying tears of gratitude on seeing the student evaluations. Students testified that the course was amazing, inspiring, and the coolest, that it boosted their self-confidence and self-expression and offered them, quote, a safe haven. And then after attending a performance that showcased the students' work, Clegg, who is a professor at Michigan, wrote this to Smith: seeing the students perform was revelatory for me, and I can only begin to imagine the positive and transformative impact that you've had on these students' lives. So less than a week later, Clegg wrote to De-Essence that she was approved to teach 2 additional classes that would build on her first offering and thus provide students the means to progress to more advanced levels of rap songwriting. So I use this example to say, all I did was to ask to invite her along, and I invited some people who had some influence, and then De-Essence did the rest. But if you think about it, if those gates are shut, that amazing talent will never have an opportunity to come into the institution and to have the really incredible, profound impact that it had. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So my second recommendation, exhortation, whatever you might call it, is to move the music from the periphery to the center. So think about, and I actually can't speak for the UK, but I imagine what I say about the US is similar. But consider the history of popular music in educational institutions. Typically, music enters at the periphery, on the edges or the margins. So whether it's jazz or rock or hip hop, the music generally has an extracurricular existence first. So it takes root in student clubs or after-school programs. And this is often where the music stays. If it progresses any further, it may enter the curriculum as an elective, an optional course, but never part of a sequence of advancing levels and never to fulfill a degree or graduation requirement. So opening the gates, therefore, only accomplishes so much if the music remains on the margins. If students can easily finish their schooling without ever encountering the music in a class or other required activity. And I think this is often where popular music genres languish. We pat ourselves on the back. Look, there's hip hop, there's rock, there's jazz, but it's never required for anyone, and any student can easily avoid it if they want to. So I'll give an example of a very long process of moving music from periphery to center, which is at my own institution, the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And I've taught there since 2006. So before I arrived in the 1990s, there was a student hip hop organization, and the scholar Michael Eric Dyson was then a professor in the Department of Communication. He often addressed hip hop in his courses, but hip hop was not widely embraced at UNC. For example, Dyson was heavily criticized by parents and alumni in 1996 when all he did was cite rap lyrics at a commencement speech. The university administration did nothing to defend him, and Dyson left the university shortly after that. As far as I know, hip hop had little or no presence in my department, which is music. When I introduced hip hop into my teaching in 2007, I actually wasn't met with any real resistance, though a colleague did make sure to tell me how much he hated hip hop regularly. Nor did I find any roadblocks when I proposed hiring hip hop artists to co-teach with me or when I created the Beat Lab, a space that houses turntables, drum machines, synthesizers, and production stations. And, oh, I think maybe it's the next one. Yes, okay, sorry, we'll have to go back. It's a little hard to see, but those are some images of the Beat Lab. And by the way, it's a little hard to see, but on the right is me with Fife Dog, who came to visit in 2014. So talk about a magical moment for the students. I just have to say I mean, there's nothing I could ever do as a teacher that will have the same impact of what he did in the classroom. He actually came twice. And he actually came as a guest of someone else just because he wanted to see a basketball game. But then I happened to have a mic on me and handed it to him. And he went on to rap, for half an hour. And it was really a life-changing experience for the students. And so, I mean, again, all I did was hand him a mic and let him, I mean, you would think that's easy to accomplish, but there's so many roadblocks to just having people in the spaces. But in any case, yes, that's a Beat Lab, and there's me and Fife. Okay, rest in power. Okay, now what I did is, the reason why I didn't get a lot of resistance is that I secured the funding to hire the artist and to purchase the equipment. And what I don't know is what the response would have been if my initiatives actually cost the department money. I suspect they would not have been as welcoming. Now, the only time that I felt really thwarted in my efforts was when I proposed hiring a well-known hip hop producer, Ninth Wonder, who had expressed interest in teaching a beat making class at UNC. He lives near me, and I got to know him, and he said, hey, I could teach at UNC. And I said, I would love that. I went to the dean. The dean said, let me see his resume. Ninth Wonder had not finished university. So it said, no, we can't do that. So can you imagine a more qualified person than that? That's an example of this kind of gatekeeping that we really have to address. In any case, hip hop's presence did grow steadily at UNC, but it still existed in the margins. We brought in a few hip hop artists to teach an occasional class, but we could only hire people who had advanced graduate degrees, and they were only ever part-time instructors. Courses that focused on hip hop could only be taken as electives, and they fulfilled no requirements for music majors. In fact, it was only in the past few years that a more fundamental shift in the role of hip hop began. The two most important achievements in moving hip hop from periphery to center only came last year in 2022. The first was the revamping of our curriculum to allow music majors to focus their study on hip hop and other popular genres. The second was the hiring of our first full-time faculty member in hip hop composition and performance, the producer, composer, songwriter, and entrepreneur, Susie Analog. So this is just such a huge deal that she is now the university's first full-time hip hop artist. And again, that shouldn't be a big deal. We've had full-time violinists, full-time organists for centuries in universities. We should have full-time hip hop artists, grime artists, rock artists, and so on. So let me just fire up. Okay, so I'll cite three lessons to draw from this trajectory of hip hop at UNC. First, moving any music from periphery to center requires the full or majority participation of the unit or institution. No single advocate is sufficient to chart this course. I found that out because it took me 16, 17 years to actually get to that point. And I actually didn't think it would ever happen. I thought I might retire and then all hip hop would disappear. So no one person, no matter how hard they advocate, no matter how much money they bring in, will make that systemic change if the rest of them aren't brought along. Now, as the second lesson is that, as I just mentioned, it requires systemic change. So one of my mantras at UNC has been that it should be possible for beat makers and banjo players to be music majors at UNC. Bluegrass is also big in North Carolina. But this could never be possible within the system that had existed in my department for decades. And my mantra could only become reality with the adoption of a new curriculum, one that totally reimagined the music history and theory sequences, that challenged the definition of music literacy as the ability to read Western printed notation, and added new courses in popular music. Now, even this wasn't sufficient. We also had to prioritize the hiring of new faculty proficient in popular musics and eliminate the requirement that graduate level degrees were required of all faculty. And I'll say one of the great things about our hiring of Susie Analog is that she does not have a master's degree, PhD, but she is eminently qualified, and for the first time, we were able to hire someone without a graduate degree. Okay, so now the third lesson is that moving hip hop or any kind of music from periphery to center requires sustained commitment. This move is ongoing at UNC, and it's too early really to gauge its success. But I know that there will not be success without the continued funding of hip hop activities and a commitment to a cultural shift in which students studying hip hop, and bluegrass for that matter, are taken as seriously and are given as much a chance to succeed as any other student. Okay, my third exhortation is evaluate. So just the other day, a friend of mine shared a phrase that she had heard in her work as a media relations person. She said, "That which is measured is rewarded," or you might say, "That which is measured can be rewarded." Now that really struck me, and I want to take heed of this idea in my own work. And by the way, I've been hearing so many great examples of really robust evaluation systems that I would love to hear from others who have done this. So if hip hop, house, grime, or any other contemporary popular genre is to have a robust, authentic, and sustained existence within our educational system, their value needs to be communicated to all stakeholders: teachers, administrators, funders, and the public. Now, this goal is well served by developing robust and rigorous evaluation mechanisms. Unfortunately, the outcomes we most desire from our engagement with students are often the hardest to measure, whether because of the difficulty of assessing causality or because the most desired impacts manifest themselves months or years after students have left the classroom. Many of us have had students, and this is always a wonderful thing, who come back years later and say, "Your class really affected me, but I didn't know it at the time." So I want to offer a few suggestions for addressing these challenges, with the understanding that there's so much more to say. Now, for one, evaluation should be part of curriculum design and not relegated to brief peer reviews or a 15-minute window accorded to students on the last day of class. And that's how it is in the US. Evaluation is really not taken very seriously. Now, feedback and input should be collected regularly and should be integral to the structure of the course or activity. Second, in addition to assessing knowledge acquisition and skill development, we should seek to measure broader areas of growth, both among students and in our curricula. So here are a few questions that I think would be useful to ask. And again, I would love to hear other thoughts. Now, do students, especially those whose communities have been traditionally marginalized or oppressed, feel more included? Do curricula represent the diversity of students' identities and experiences through course materials and staffing? Do the educational materials and activities encourage students to develop empathy for others? Do students feel empowered to express themselves in ways that feel authentic to them? Do curricula offer pathways to further artistic development and potential employment? Now, finally, I should say that students, current students and alumni, as well as practitioners, should be involved in the development of evaluation practices and materials. Now, yes, we educators are experts in our fields. However, it is vital that those who are truly dedicated to bringing hip hop and popular music styles into a university setting center the agency of the communities that nourish these musics and the agency of our students who find these musics so life-giving. And I've heard this already a number of times. We need to center the students and have student-led objectives. Now, I'd like to share a comment from a student evaluation from one of my undergraduate courses. It's a new course that I teach called Music and Incarceration in the United States. And we work with incarcerated musicians and talk with them about their musical lives. And this was an anonymous statement. And this person said, "I was truly able to find and use my voice in this classroom. Never felt uncomfortable or ashamed when I did or didn't speak. As a Black student, feeling comfortable sharing my perspectives and opinions at a predominantly white institution and classroom is vital to my learning. And so far at UNC, this is the first class I can say I truly felt that." Now, when I saw this, I was, of course, very pleased that the student felt included, but I was also really sad to hear that this was not the student's typical experience. But the reason I bring it up here is that this comment pushed me to think more carefully and more deeply about how I might evaluate the extent to which my teaching fosters a sense of inclusion among students who come from traditionally marginalized communities. So one point I'm making is to reinforce the point about centering the experience of students by looking at what matters to them and then deriving evaluation systems to measure whether we're doing that or not. So to close, I want to continue to center the work of practitioners by giving the final word to the Ugandan b-boy educator and promoter, Kawase Mark. There he is. Now, Mark found purpose and community as a homeless orphan teen on the streets of Kampala when he started learning hip hop dance through the nonprofit organization Breakdance Project Uganda. Years later, he's still working with BPU, but he's also founded Breakfast Jam, or Breakfast Jam, which is, quote, an initiative that nurtures and promotes dance, art, hip hop, and urban culture. So I recently asked, actually, when I was preparing for this, I asked him what he sees as the benefits that can arise from students interacting with hip hop. And he provided me a list, and I'm going to quote him. He said, "Being inspired by how people with nothing created a powerful global movement, building connections with people around the world, being inspired by positive, groundbreaking contributions of hip hop worldwide, learning about the power and creativity and innovation, and reflecting on their lives," end quote. I think most of us who do this kind of work do it exactly for the reasons Mark describes. We want to foster connection, creativity, innovation, and reflection. We want to inspire and be inspired. From my perspective, this is not only a powerful final message, but an apt way to understand the goals of this gathering. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. And see one hand going up. And if you continue right then, if you don't mind, my camera assistant over there with any Zoom questions and practice for
That was fabulous, and thank you for the sharing as well. My name's Shane, I run a songwriting degree at Conservatoire Music College, and I'm very taken with this quote, particularly for the UK. But I just would love to get your response. And it's using the term hip hop, but you could insert any particular style of music, but it's music from that world. And it is, hip hop doesn't need higher education. Higher education needs hip hop. And I'd love to know your response.
Yeah, I do agree with that. There are plenty, I mean, Jay-Z doesn't need another honorary degree. He's doing fine. There are many hip hop artists who haven't gone through university and have very successful lives. So I agree that really universities need hip hop more than hip hop needs universities. However, with that said, I will say that I have worked with lots of hip hop artists who really enjoy connecting with universities, who find it very gratifying to be in classrooms, to have the opportunity to teach at a high level. And also there's a way that I've described this is that when, at least at the kind of what I think the optimal situation would be is that when universities work with hip hop communities, there should be an equal exchange of credibility. So on one side, you have street credibility, which universities want. They want that because it brings students in. It's, frankly, good for the optics. They could have nice pictures. At least in the U.S., it shows, it plays well. But it also, not just at that superficial level, that credibility means so much to the students. I mean, just think of the story I told of Fife Dog from the group, A Tribe Called Quest. I mean, I'm sure that that was the highlight of every single student's experience that semester, not anything I did. So we do need them. But he also loved being in the university. He felt it was gratifying, and for a number of people, they say it helped. Their families appreciate it. I was working with a DJ who I taught, who I hired to teach with me, and he comes from he's Indian. He comes from a background where his family wanted him to be an engineer or lawyer, but he was a very successful DJ. But they said, finally, you're doing something we could be proud of, when he taught in at the university. So first of all, I do agree with what you're saying overall, but there are lots of good reasons that hip hop or benefits to musicians who aren't already in the system. We just have to make it accessible, hospitable, and rewarding, and make sure that it's an equivalent exchange. But thanks for that.
Thanks, Mark. We're getting some very enthusiastic comments from the Zoom, but I think, in fact, this one says it's not a question. I'll just read this out quickly. I can see there was a hand up there, Edgar, so I will come in a second. Brenda said, not a question, just a prayer that the wisdom shared, particularly by the last two speakers, will not stay in the room. Going forward, what changes will those that hold the power and keys to change, the gatekeepers, make? What are the first steps to change? I'll just quickly read this as well from Raphael Travis. You talk about this in the context of music education. In mental health fields, he's in social work, we have accreditation based restrictions on advanced degrees for instruction, but have the opportunity to collaborate with teaching artists and practitioners. Have you had cross-discipline discussions for problem solving around bringing folks in? So if you could
yeah, sure. Thanks. Where am I looking? Thanks, Raphael. Not really, I'll say, and I'd love to talk to you about that. I have tried, I will say yes to a certain extent, because I know in the business school at my university, they have lots of people without advanced degrees who come in, and I've asked them how they get get the accreditation or get the get them in the classroom, and they said there's this form and so on. But it's just never worked for me. And I have to say, I mean, I think there's a difference because most of the people who come into the business school are white and often rich and male, and that is not the demographic that is often, that we're trying to hire to teach hip hop. So I think the cross-disciplinary discussions have not helped me yet, but I would love to talk to you, Raphael, about how you've made that work. So, thank you.
Something that I observed a lot in my studies is obviously the influence of Trisha Rose, and I found it fascinating that when you think of Trisha Rose, a lot of people, a lot of scholars in hip hop education do come from humanities and a sociological background. And I just wondering your thoughts on how you feel the fact that Patricia Rose's work and how a lot of elected and higher education people from a sociological background has effect on education.
Well, yeah, thank you for mentioning Trisha Rose, who's a kind of foundational theorist in hip hop studies. And I think it's important to think of her as a theorist in the, not that she needs any help from us, but we talk about theory and they're usually names of dead French men. But Tricia Rose should be considered a theorist in that same, at that same level of significance. So first of all, thanks for that. No, I think, the interesting thing that I found in hip hop education is that it's mostly from disciplines outside of music. And so music as a discipline is way behind sociology and communication studies and history, at least in the US. So I think people in music fields need to look outside of music and see all the great work that's being done by humanities and social science scholars. But yeah, thanks for that, Edward.
Thanks. There's more really nice comments on the chat here. Martin Malari saying, these are inspiring for their successes. People generally are surprised the field of music education does not require hip-hop courses. I'm speaking from a Canadian context. Somebody from China mentioning content of hip-hop is almost invisible in the music education curriculum in China. Interesting comment here from Ravas. For these cases of professionals who stand out from their peers and who do not have an academic degree, we have the status of specialist. One, someone whose status is a source of livelihood, and two, the way they carry out their activity stands out from the way their peers do it. So,
well, just on that point, we do have what's called professor of the practice. But again, it's applied unevenly. These are usually people who are in the local orchestra or are local jazz musicians. I still think there is it's obvious, there's still a prejudice against hip hop, even though it's becoming more and more mainstream. So I think what we need to do is just keep pushing on that and say, look, these things exist. We can do this. It is not, we do not have to reinvent anything. But I've just had people just put me off and say, no, I've just heard so many excuses. It's very frustrating. But I do think finally at my university, we're starting to move past that because we did hire Susie and she does not have a graduate degree.
Can I invite